I'm Charles Smith. I came up with this topic just out of the blue before the topic of a speech even came about. They announced who was going to be inducted in the 2013 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They had 3 names that was on that list, and I was questioned, what did they have to do with rock and roll? You had Quincy Jones, you had Public Enemy, and you had Donna Summers that was inducted in 2013. I said, well, they had a lot to do with rock and roll because their people started with the root of rock and roll. World War II ended. World War II ended. We're going into the 1950s. Okay, the United States is in the repairing stage, trying to repair Japan from the things that happened during World War II. The Korean conflict is beginning to wind down. What happens after a war, you got ready cash and everything. And so, you know, the United States was in the rebuilding stage here at home. The young people was looking for a new identity for themselves. You had the Cold War was getting cranked up. But what was happening in America was very big. America was, the music industry was pregnant. It was getting ready to give birth to a new style of music called rock and roll. Now, rock and roll had its roots in the South with the blues, you know. But the thing is that they could not sell their records. They couldn't even record their records in the South because of the segregation. They had to go up north or even go west to record the songs. But you had a record, how you say it, he's Big Will, Sam Phillips. Sam Phillips was interested in this music, this type of music of black artists. And he said, well, they don't have to leave to go record it. They can stay here and do it. So Sam Phillips was recording this black music. A lot of people was hating Sam Phillips for doing it, but he was pocketing the money. He was making it because what was happening, the young people was getting the opportunity to find music that they were interested in. They liked the way it sounded, they liked the way but it was still had the cloud over because of who the music was called. The music was called race music. So, you know, no matter what you sung, whether it was jazz or blues, rhythm and blues or gospel, if you was a black artist, it was all under the umbrella of race. So what Alan Freed, he was a disc jockey. He wanted to bring about a big change in it. He wanted to present this music to white audiences for the first time in public. They wouldn't have to go hide and listen to this music, which was easy for them to do then because in the 50s, transistor radios came out. So they could take the transistor radios, go to the park, to the beach or whatever, and listen to this music. But Alan Freed went under the name of Moondog. He wanted to bring these acts together, but he couldn't bring them together until he called them something else. So he heard a lot of these black artists talking about rock and roll. And it sounded catchy. He said, yeah, that's good, rock and roll. But see, rock and roll was a term that was used in the black community to mean that you had a good night in bed. It was a sex term, rocking and rolling. So he called it rock and roll and brought them all together to perform for the first time. This was one of the first times that in the auditorium, it wasn't segregated. they took down the ropes. See, they used to keep a rope stretched across where whites, if they came together, they had to be on one side or the other. Well, the ropes was removed, and they had a chance to play their music. And Sam Phillips, he was still thinking. He said, "Man, I'm making a lot of money off of these rock and roll artists, but if I could find me a white man that could capture that black sound, boy, I could be a millionaire." Well, at that time, you could go to these recording studios and pay $2 or $3 and record whatever you wanted to. If you wanted to do a letter and put it on vinyl, a poem or whatever. Well, this young kid walked in and he wanted to do a couple of songs for his mother. And nobody knew who he was, but the secretary was sitting there listening, saying, that sounds like the sound that Sam Phillips is looking for. So she secretly recorded it. And she took it to Sam Phillips and said, "Check this out." And he listened to it. He said, "Who is this?" And he loved it. And he had the dude come in to do a couple of songs, record a couple of songs. Well, the dude was nervous and everything, and he sang the songs and everything. Instead of patting his feet, he started shaking his leg and everything. And so Sam Phillips, he kind of liked that. He said, "Hey, I want you to keep that in there." That was the first time that Elvis had actually hit the scene, because he had been singing hillbilly type of song. Now, since I mentioned Elvis, I want to mention a dude named Otis Blackwell. A lot of people had never heard of Otis Blackwell. And it wasn't until when Stevie Wonder won a bunch of awards for Songs in the Key of Life that he presented one of his awards to Otis Blackwell. He called Otis Blackwell up to the stage and gave him one of his awards, because Otis Blackwell was a songwriter. He just died in 2002. Otis Blackwell wrote over 1,000 of the rock and roll hits during that time. Never got any royalties or anything, because he sold the songs to the songwriters for about $50. Just, you know, put in some of the hits that he wrote, like "Don't Be Cruel," "All Shook Up," "Great Balls of Fire," "Handyman," "Return to Sender." But, you know, he was just in the background. A lot of these rock and roll artists back then, they never got paid, because they just wanted to get out there. And it's a good thing that they did get out there. It's sad that they didn't get paid. Some of them died penniless. You had a lot of things going on with rock and roll. You had a lot of prejudice going on. They even had an investigation to why a lot of these record stores, a lot of these radio stations was playing this rock and roll. They figured it's got to be something done illegally, that they could allow these black savages to be exposed to these young white kids. So that brought out the payola scandal. They said, well, you must be getting paid in order to do this. You're not just doing it on your own. But you know, payola is something that happens all the time in just about everything. If you go to the supermarket, you'll notice that the big beverage companies monopolize most of the shelves. It's because they pay these people to give them so much space. And the same thing, but they wanted to make it bad because blacks was involved in that time, and they didn't want it. A lot of the people in the South protested the music. They even once turned off the power in one of his concerts because they figured it's a bad influence for them. You had a lot of things that could have been changed. A lot of the rock and roll stars, the black stars, was producing the songs, but some of the record stores didn't want to sell them. So what they did, they went and got white established artists to record the same song in order for it to sell. They called them cover artists. You have, Pat Boone was probably one of the biggest cover artists of all. Almost everything Pat Boone did had been previously done by a black artist. When you hear Elvis talk about, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog," Big Mama Thornton, Willie Mae Thornton, did that first. But it was just something, you didn't own nothing. Back then, if you recorded it, it was free for anybody else to record it. Sometimes on the hit charts, you might have had 5 different people doing the same song. Speaking of Big Mama Thornton, Houston has the distinction of having the very first rock and roll casualty. In 1954, it was Christmas Eve at the Houston Auditorium. They had a concert going on, rock and roll concert. You had a singer named Johnny Ace. He had a hit called "Pleasure My Love." Well, Johnny Ace was backstage and he was drinking and he was playing Russian roulette with his girlfriend. He was spinning the chamber and aiming it at her and pulling the trigger. Well, Big Mama Thornton walked in and said, "If you want to do something, put it to your own head." He spun the chamber, put it to his own head. And see, back then, if you was a black performer, they wanted you to process your hair. They wanted your hair straight. They didn't want you going in front of the camera on stage with hair like this. The women, most of the women, they wanted to wear a wig. Well, when he pulled the trigger, they say it stuck out like porcupine quills because it went straight through. But that's one thing that Houston have. Houston have a few firsts and everything, but that was the first casualty in rock and roll. So when you hear about people like the Impressions, the Temptations, the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, James Brown, the Coasters, Stevie Wonder, Ike and Tina Turner, you hear these names, Run DMC, and you wonder what they got to do with rock and roll. They got everything to do with rock and roll because rock and roll was named for them. It's just that they decided that after, when the 60s came in and you had the big civil rights movement, they wanted something different. They wanted their own identity since they was named by somebody else in the 50s. So they went back to rhythm and blues. They started calling it soul and different names. So we have branched off from what started as us first, us. And boy, I'll tell you one thing. I don't know if anybody heard of Dobie Gray. You heard of a singer named Dobie Gray. Dobie Gray put out a song that became one of the rock anthems. And most of the time when you hear it, I didn't even know he was black. It's a song called Drift Away. And in the song he say, "Give me the beat, boys, and free my soul. I want to get lost in the rock and roll and drift away." And that's what rock and roll is. It takes you somewhere where some people never been.